Everyone will give her just a few minutes to let everyone get in before we get started. Okay, I'm gonna get rolling. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Driscoll. I'm the Communications Director at the Steamship Authority. I'm here at our Falmouth Administration Office with Bob Davis, the General Manager. And I know there are several staff members on the Zoom as well, but I see Kate Wilson, our Falmouth board member, and Robert Jones, our Barnstable board member, and I know Bill Cloutier and Joe Levesque are in the audience as well that I've seen so far. So just a couple of notes before we get started here. This is being recorded. I've already started it. So once we're done with this, I'll post this video on our YouTube channel and link it on our Woods Hole Terminal reconstruction page as well. And just for some context, so this is the third forum we've had on the terminal design and the first one of the design development phase. We're planning one more community input session for the design development phase that'll come towards the end of that phase, which would be sometime in late 2021 or early 2022. This is a forum tonight. It's not a public board meeting, so there aren't going to be any votes taken or any motions made. This is an opportunity for us to bring you up to speed on what's changed since the last forum and developments in the design of the landside terminal project, and then to open up for some questions and answers. And as always, you can email your thoughts either directly to me, to Bob, or we have an email address, which is whterminalfeedback@steamshipauthority.com. So a few more notes about tonight. We're going to focus, as I said, on changes that have been made since the last community input session and developments, especially in the Cahoon Park area and in the areas of sustainability. So the schematic design phase was completed earlier this year. We're in the design development phase with the goal still of construction bid documents being issued in 2022. Right now, you all have your video and audio off, and I will enable that after the presentation for questions and answers. But I want our presenters to be able to, they have quite a lot to get through. So if you can hold your questions to the end, and then we'll take them at that point. So at this point, I will turn it over to Chris Iwerks and Leanne Davis, and you guys can start your presentation.
Thank you, Sean. Just shared my screen. Did that work?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay. So tonight with the design team, we have myself and Chris Iwerks from BIA Studio, the architects for the project. And we also have with IBI Placemaking, which is our landscape architect, Rick Williams and Jeff Bittenbender. In addition, we have Colleen Sodden from Sodden Sustainability. She's our lead and sustainability consultant for the project. And Nate Russell with GZA Geo Environmental, the civil engineer. So as Sean said, we have quite a bit of material to get through tonight. So we're really going to be focusing this presentation on the recent development in the landscape design and updates on sustainability and LEED. And at the end of the presentation, we'll be running through the projected phasing for the construction of the project, since this will be a multi-year, multi-phase construction sequence that starts to inform how the design will develop. So without further ado, Rick, do you want to take it from there?
I will. Thanks, Leanne. As Leanne said, I'm a landscape architect for the team, focused on primarily some of the site design with the civil as well, working on the pedestrian kind of experience. So this plan, I guess, would like to just kind of run through kind of an overview of what has transpired in terms of development for some of the pedestrian spaces around the site. And then we'll get into a little bit more detail of particularly the plaza area and Cahoon's Park, as well as the bike parking area. But one thing I wanted to note is we did a quick takeoff just recently of what the current pedestrian open space the square footages were relative to what the existing kind of pre-existing conditions were. And we found that we actually have, if you include all of the pedestrian designated hardscape and planting areas, roughly doubled 200% the amount of pedestrian designated space for the site, which is pretty impressive, and definitely will be helpful in terms of safety moving forward.
Did we lose Rick?
Did we
Or is
lose
it-
Rick?
Seems like it.
Or he's holding very still?
Maybe we'll just give him another moment. Otherwise, I can take over where he left off.
He probably has to go back, log back in.
Okay, well, I'll just continue with what Rick was covering. So the general site area, we've made a concerted effort to increase pedestrian and bicycle zones on the site. Given the nature of the site, it's obviously very vehicle traffic dominant. And so that's been one of our main drivers with focusing on safety and efficient ways to move people through the site from their vehicles to the waterfront and to the village.
Leon, I don't know if you can hear me now. I'm back, but I think my video is gonna stay off. I'm not sure what happened there. I got cut off. I apologize.
Sure, Rick.
We can move to the next slide, I think, in terms of diving in a little bit to the terminal plaza itself. So what we're proposing here, in addition to kind of the terrace area that will surround the building, which is up at elevation 13, we're proposing a almost like an exterior waiting room, kind of spill out space for the ticketing center, that essentially users that are, going onto the boat or waiting for the bus have a place outside to sit. It'll be down kind of at elevation 10 roughly, and we'll provide lots of different kind of unique built-in seating elements for the user that's here once a year versus every weekend. There's a different place to sit, a different thing to look at. I think the views out to the water will be pretty significant from the space, and providing a little bit of screening and filtered view from Luscombe, which is due north on the page, or kind of northwest on the page, of kind of a filtered view of the building itself. The element in the middle is a placeholder for now, but it's essentially representing kind of a sculptural, usable sculptural space or element that could be used to, essentially be something interesting to look at, but also be usable in terms of being able to sit on it or kind of play in it. It's kind of an informal placeholder at this point, but that's the general goal. The paving and proposed material that will be in this space obviously will be high quality. We'll get into looking at what some of those could be on a later slide. I guess next slide, please. The site sections that we're showing here, cutting through essentially the terminal building through the terrace. This is, AA, section AA, is really what we're trying to indicate here, is that there is a grade difference that's happening from down at Cahoon's Park, which is at roughly around elevation 6 to 7, up to the building finished floor elevation, which is roughly 13. So the site is kind of terracing down as you go towards Railroad and Luscombe Ave, and that's really what these sections are kind of indicating. The bottom section is also showing kind of how that the back of the plaza space will essentially present itself, the edge of it will present itself to the streetscape in a green kind of manner. That's where we're going to be kind of providing a planted buffer basically for a screening kind of filtered view. So from coming down Luscombe Ave, you'll have kind of a green view at it. Next slide. This is a slide that is kind of showing like I said, the fit and finish of what we're expecting out here. There's we're expecting a high quality, granite and wood, something comfortable to sit on, has to have, good ergonomics. But the rigidity and durability of granite out here at this location is, I think, critical as well. Plaza features, in the column that we're showing there, these are just supposed to be, in keeping with some vocabulary of the space, kind of referencing kind of beach stones or some other art element that has some precedent for being there, I think is a good place to have an opportunity. And then the seat walls, using reclaimed C block in informal locations, as we're out towards Cahoons Park versus as we get closer to the building, maybe having it be a little bit more refined in terms of sawn and thermal finish type of conditions, but using a similar material and just kind of treating it slightly different as we kind of work our way around the site. Next slide. One of the things that we wanted to do was get community input. And we recently had Leon and I came down to the site, had a nice walk through the village with a few community members to look at different elements, some art, interpretives, some of the historic features, and the horse trough that's kind of shown to the left. And then also just, talking about what potentially could be discussed or could be explored in interpretive form in the plaza. On the right side, we've got the Cahoons Market, the Steamship Authority history, geographic, elements like what the holes are, and then the indigenous people. There's a strong story there as well. So there's plenty of opportunity to expand, I think, on what that could be. And I think through continued community input, I think we can tell some pretty interesting stories. And I think Sean may open up a conversation here just quickly with Arden.
Sure, I'm going to let Arden, I'm going to unmute you just for a second so that you can chime in. I know you have to jump off here. So you should be able to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Rick and Leon for coming down. I think they got a good idea of the village, all the little parks that we have, what our interests are, the fact that we do want things more informal than rigid. I think you said you'd send me a larger scale drawing, and if you could still do that, that would be great. We did look at the trees along Luscombe Avenue, and we did talk about the possibility of seeing if some of them could be saved, some of the really nice ones. I think it depends a lot on how close they are to other trees and what their root systems are like. We did ask if it would be possible to consider not just one long array of solar panels, but maybe 3 with the possibility of trees more on the Luscombe Avenue side and not down where the park is, where the bicycles would be parked. We also asked if 200 bike parking spaces are really needed. It seems to me that a lot of people want to take their bikes with them. These cyclists don't want to let go of their bikes. I don't know. Let's see. They did stop to see the lovely photo at the bank, which shows the entire area. It's was nice. And we're on the same page with them as far as all the native plants. An interesting thing has happened recently. There's been more interest in getting both of the drinking fountains back to their original places or near their original places. And apparently Rick says that they have an expert in fountains at the firm where he works. And he said that we could have, if we get the trough back, the fountain back, we could have circulating water for 3 seasons of the year. And then it could be it would be a circulating pump. And then at a certain time, it would empty out the water and bring in fresh water. This would be all done by computer probably, and that it could be solar powered. And also the light on the top of the fountain could be solar powered. So that's looking more positive. They asked us to get more information from the community, and they're asking that again. And if you have information that you could send to either Catherine Bumpus or to me, that would be great. My email, Catherine's is catherinebumpus@gmail.com. And mine is my full name, Arden Edwards, 353@gmail. And we will compile any information, any wishes that you would like to put forth for historic interpretation. I think we could have a lot of fun with this. That's all I think I have to say.
Great. Thank you, Arden.
Thank you, Arden.
Righto.
All right, I think I have to ask Rick to unmute.
Okay, thank you. I got somehow muted again. Thanks, Arden. I appreciate that. We did enjoy the walk, and I think we learned quite a bit from that. So I think that there's continued kind of coordination with potentially relocating those horse troughs, and we're showing it here in the drawing as kind of a fountain. Whether or not those make it back to their original locations, that'd be great. If not, there's a place that we can ultimately have sculpture or some other interpretive element out there within the park. So we're providing kind of potential for kind of community engagement in terms of the interpretive panels, what that element is that could be a fountain, could be a sculpture, and then additional panel locations that could tell the story of this region or specifically of this site. What we're looking at in plan view really quickly is, there's obviously, we're trying to increase the amount of canopy and shade out there. The site is generally, paved. So the more we can put planting and trees to get canopy and comfort out there would be critical. The large kind of rectangular block that we're looking at essentially are the seawall blocks that we're reclaiming and using essentially as kind of an informal seating amphitheater element out there. As you come across the crosswalk on the bottom of the screen, you're essentially coming from the plaza to a landing area that you can either decide to go downstairs, to traverse down the stairs, or you can kind of go to the right. And the elevation change that's happening to get down to Luscombe Ave is roughly 2.5 feet. So we're using that to essentially create an accessible path through there. I guess if we go to the next slide.
Rick, just real quick, Arden raised her hand. I want to make sure she didn't think of something else she wanted to add.
Sure.
Arden, did you have anything else you wanted to, or is that an old hand?
You'll have to unmute yourself.
Oops. Sorry, Arden, try again. There you go.
Okay. In looking at that plan, we had talked about bringing back the granite seating wall to use that as a sitting wall when we got together a few weeks ago. And
Right, reusing that granite block that's out there, right? We are planning to use that.
Okay, and the good thing about that is if there were a hurricane, they would be able to, because it's a raised bed, basically, they would be able to flood that area with fresh water before that there might be an intrusion of salt water. So that would protect the plants somewhat. And let's see, there was something else. Oh, well, we've so far we have about 15 people who are very eager to help with this with the park, and they will be hearing from me, and we're going to get together, and they're going to send their ideas to both Catherine and to me, and that would be great. And I think that's it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Arden. Yeah, we definitely, one of the things that we spoke about, and Arden just brought it up, was reusing the old granite block that was out there as part of the old Cahoons Park, to elevate basically the plant beds, to make sure that that we're getting elevation, primarily because this is the low point of the site. So if there is any salt intrusion coming over the bulkhead, that there's a way for it to get out before it goes into the planting soil. So it's a good point. Thank you for bringing that back up. Next slide. So we just talked a little bit about that planting. All of the plants that we're showing here on this slide are essentially native or highly adaptive that you see throughout the Cape. I think we went and walked, with Arden and Patty and Ted, and kind of looked at a lot of the existing material that's out there. Some of it is successful, others are not. And I think what we're proposing is not any different than what we've seen out there today. And I think that there's an opportunity probably for not just what's on the slide, but there's other material that is consistent with what grows and thrives down there that is native to the village. So I think we can expand on that as we need to. Next slide. The next slide here is just the bicycle approach for the context plan. The light blue line that you're seeing is the Shining Sea bike path as it currently exists. And then when it turns to dashed, that is where we're essentially saying that it terminates. It's essentially where it terminates today. We're formalizing it with kind of a larger bike parking area in that location. Previously, we had shown in an earlier scheme the bike parking happening out where Cahoon Park is, but given the value of that space to make it a community park, shifting the bikes over closer to Railroad Ave made more sense, as well as the safety and security, of those bikes and the people traversing kind of within the vehicular area. We met with the bicycle and pedestrian committee, as well as the DPW, in terms of the discussion of where these bike locations would be, emphasizing, trying to maximize the parking because there is a plethora of bikes there during the season. And then also separation of use and trying to make sure that we establish, proper safety measures for all of the users out there. So if we go to the next slide. These are some of the images of what's out there today along Railroad Ave. There's a decent amount of vegetation, as Arden said, up towards the bridge abutment. This is material that we're looking to preserve because we won't be affecting the root system. Where we may be disturbing, sloped conditions and root systems on these slopes, will most likely, if the bike parking remains as is, we'll need to replace and reinforce the planting that's happening on that embankment to provide that screening again. This plan is, there's two sets of plans here. The bottom is essentially our proposed bike parking plan, where we're showing the solar canopy kind of floating above it. But the white line, double line, is the wall that needs to be installed in there to essentially hold kind of the bank of the parking is, those trees that are shown in a line are essentially going to end up being a replanted embankment. You can see it a little bit better in the next slide, which is a section showing on the right side there, we've got Railroad Ave, the planting kind of coming down the hillside, a low wall, which actually will climb as it goes further south. And then the 6.5 feet of bike parking, a 10-foot clear bike path, another 6.5 feet of bike parking, a 7.5 feet of loading, unloading area underneath the solar canopy with the adjacent loading, unloading vehicular zone of 10 feet, and then a drive aisle. So it really, and you can see in the dashed line, the existing grade, we're bringing grade up several feet in that location. So part of that hill will actually be buried in the future conditions. So the elevation change isn't as severe. Next slide. I think we'll turn it over to Colleen.
Thank you, Rick. So I'll just introduce
Before
Colleen.
you, Leanne, before you switch, I want to, Arden put her hand back up. I'm going to let her have one more word on that.
Sure.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to say that I was very pleased to see, as I drove into Woods Hole today, a 20-mile-per-hour brand new speed sign just past Challenger House. And one thing we discussed a few weeks ago was having the Luscombe Ave have some kind of a texture that would slow the traffic down a little bit. I don't know if that's possible, but we did discuss it. And I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Arden.
Bye.
Okay, so we're going to hand it over now to Colleen. And again, she's the consultant on the project, responsible for lead and sustainability. Colleen, why don't you take it from
Great.
there?
Good evening, everyone. We're very excited to provide a lead update. We had some great meetings over the past few weeks with both the design team and the Steamship Authority to kind of tighten up our lead checklist and approach. And what I thought I would do, since not everyone does lead all day, every day, is that we'd walk you through essentially, kind of the context of lead and all of the different initiatives that we're and credits that we're pursuing. That way it'll just give you a sort of broader context of all of the sustainability thinking. So obviously, the primary intent is to make sure that sustainability informs every design decision. So from landscape design, stormwater management, when we talk about our solar, our envelope, material implications, every single decision that we make as a design team has an impact on sustainability. LEED is a very good framework to be able to track and benchmark all of the sustainability goals. It's a good ruler. It's not a design guide. So there's both prerequisites and credits for LEED. And while all the prerequisites have to be met, the credits are optional. And so inherently some projects, are a perfect fit for some credits and not for others. That's just the name of the game. If there's a strategy that you can't pursue, you just simply don't get credit for it. So, one of the first ones that we'd like to start with is integrated process. So we have a great partner in GGD. I've worked with them personally on many net zero energy projects for the city of Cambridge. And I know Leon and his team had very early involvement to be able to set both sustainability goals, but also look at different types of systems very early on, both orientation, mechanical, systems itself, water use reduction, to be able to test out and see what was the best fit for the project. That's the thing with sustainability. It's not a one size fits all. The approach really does have to be tailored to the individual project. And since this is not a project type that some of our teams work on all day, every day, it's even more so for this project. So we've got a great team. We've done extensive early modeling. I think that some of that has been presented previously, and we're excited to get into some of the other pieces. So next. So one of the first categories after the integrated process is location and transportation. So this inherently is you get credit for the site that you select, basically. So we get credit for both sensitive land protection because it's a pre-developed site. We also get credit for a high priority site because there was a nominal amount of contamination that had to be dealt with. And we're able to claim that as a brownfield, even though the site itself was not extensive contamination or any contamination apart from that very small area. The way that LEED looks at it is if there's a trigger for special treatment of soils, we're able to get credit. The surrounding density and diverse uses. So this has both two different implications. One is the physical density of the buildings that are within a half-mile radius of the site. And so that, generally, if you have a project in downtown Boston, it's a slam dunk, easy to meet. As soon as you sort of eke out into the edges of the city and into the suburbs, this becomes a little bit more tricky. That said, we do have access to different uses and community benefits within a walking distance of a half a mile. So we're still kind of working through that to see if there are any, additional density credits that we might, or points that we might be able to claim. You'll see throughout this that there are still maybe credits because given where we are in design and assessment in some cases, some of those really won't be totally fleshed out on the design side until CDs, and then on the construction side, pretty much, probably halfway through construction. So we do intend on pursuing everything that we have in the maybe column, and we'll give you an update on that at the end. In addition to this, we're also tracking the bicycle facilities. So as mentioned before, the requirements is that they're covered and protected for folks. And that you also have showers that are provided for staff. So you don't have to provide showers for the general public, but having showers for staff that might be biking to the site. We're also able to document reduced parking footprint and then also providing some carpool spaces in addition to green vehicles. And while I think the number of chargers and all that hasn't been totally fleshed out yet, we know we're going to meet the minimum requirement for LEED, which is about 5%. Next. Great. So the sustainable sites category. So while location and transportation is about really good site selection, of course, which we have, sustainable sites really opens itself up to all the different site strategies. And like I said from the beginning, the thresholds for LEED and the requirements for LEED don't always fit with every project. So, in this case, the site assessment credit is some of the arboricultural assessment or looking at the vegetation on site, trying to maintain as much of the existing vegetation as possible. Things like that, looking at topography, hydrology on the site, that's a credit we get by essentially having an extensive site assessment of which has been completed. We are increasing our open space on site by 200%, if I have that stat right from earlier. So while the open space credit for LEED is 30% of the total site area, which is a very significant square footage for any project, but given the nature of our project, not viable, we are doubling the amount of open space that currently exists right now, both pedestrian and vegetation. Anyone wants to speak to that. The heat island reduction credit looks at light colored pavement and roofing material. And while we're both have that for roofing and the PV is also an offset, it's just simply, the level of asphalt, just given the nature of the use of the project, doesn't allow us to achieve that credit. But everywhere where we can impact it, both from a pavers and roof perspective, we are. And then on light pollution reduction, so this is really about dark sky compliance. We want to make sure that all lighting on site has cutoffs. So we're not contributing to light pollution reduction. Typically we do this through a bug method. So it's the backlight, uplight, and glare certification. It's a third-party certification that looks at all of these things. We just want to make sure essentially that we're not contributing to light pollution reduction, but selecting lighting fixtures that gets the light essentially to where it needs to be. So we're not over flooding lighting, but there are some areas of the site where we want to have the right level of lighting, and we certainly, want it to be to the level of security that everyone feels good. So the bug method is really just about not having any uplight. So keeping the light of where it needs to be. Next. The next category is water efficiency. So it looks at both the exterior outdoor water use and then indoor water use and how we track that. So this is the first few credits that we look at that have prerequisites. So I mentioned that there's a difference between prerequisites and credits. Prerequisites are mandatory. So we have to achieve those. If you don't achieve those, you essentially don't have a LEED project. And then the credits are all optional. So you'll see all of this is all of the first few prerequisites are yeses. Outdoor water use reduction is a requirement of 30% reduction per midsummer baseline, which we're of course meeting. The indoor water use reduction is at least a 20% potable water use reduction for plumbing fixtures inside the building, which we're exceeding significantly. And then the building level water metering. So we simply have to have a water meter as part of the project. So the credits that we're pursuing in the different strategies beyond the prerequisites, we are actually reducing the potable water use by over 50% for outdoor water use reduction. So using a very highly efficient irrigation system. On the interior of the project, we're working toward the goal of 35 to potentially 40% indoor water use reduction for plumbing fixtures. So these are things like low flow water closets, low flow urinals, low flow showers, low flow lavatory sinks, things of that nature. The water metering credit also looks at sub-metering of water. And so, any type of sub-meter, and we'll talk about this in energy in a minute, gives us data on either both projected water use and data can help us identify if there's a system issue or error. So the great thing about having sub-metering and being able to isolate these different types of systems is that it gives feedback to folks that are running on the facility side to be able to, again, isolate any problems that present. Next. Energy and atmosphere. So we have a lot to talk about with this credit or this category. So there's a couple stats here about building energy use. There's been so much recent discussion too about our overall climate commitments in the US. We are thrilled, and we'll talk about that more directly in the next slide, that we have a very highly efficient building. We are pursuing commissioning. So sorry, I'll just go back for a moment. The first 4 credits or 4 lines there are the prerequisites for energy. So we're required to do fundamental commissioning, of which we have secured the contract for commissioning. We have to meet a minimum energy performance level. So these are very different than code compliance pieces. This is, without getting too much into the details, they're typically 2 different baselines. So for every LEED project, there's a certain amount of energy efficiency that we need. We also need to have a meter for the project. So that's a pretty low hanging fruit, but we have that. And we also have to promise to share our energy and our water data. The fundamental refrigerant management means that we don't have any CFCs. So this typically, ends up on projects that have central plants or, large campuses and things like that. So most, I don't think we've ever had a new project that I've worked on in 20 years that have put in CFCs. So those are the prereqs. On to the things that we're doing. We're, in addition to the fundamental, we're pursuing enhanced commissioning. So a typical rule of thumb in my world on commissioning is for every $1 you spend on commissioning, you get back $4 in improved performance. So this is a third-party check on both the design team, where they do a design review check to say, okay, what are the goals from the Steamship Authority for the project? What has the design team done? And there's also a peer review, essentially, of the mechanical drawings and specs. So it's a really good sort of second set of eyes, essentially, in this very big component of the project. And then throughout construction, They also look at all the submittals and do a lot of coordination, with the mechanical engineer and then obviously the mechanical contractor as well. So we try to do this in every project. It's good for the owner, it's good for the building, it's good for energy use reduction. Optimize energy, so we're achieving every single point in possible for LEED. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. Advanced energy metering is similar to the sub-metering we're talking about for water, is that we also want to do that for energy. So we can break apart our lighting loads from our plug loads, both to understand, okay, what is the projected energy use that we have from our energy model? What is actual? If those are very different, we want to understand is there an issue or lights being left on? Are there overrides essentially on potentially lighting or things like that, where the occupancy sensors or vacancy sensors should be shutting things off? So it gives you data. That's, this is kind of not necessarily a calibration of the model, but it gives us some baseline set points to be able to, reflect that back to the projection and see if we're on course. Demand response is about peak load reduction. And so we're looking at that. An easy way to do that is through battery storage with PVs, but it's also a very expensive way to do it. So we're looking through different options. Of course, on the renewable energy side of things, we're achieving all points because we have our entire electricity load covered by the solar and PV array that's proposed. And then green power and carbon offsets. In this version of LEED, of which we're proposing version 4, in version 4.1, of which we can upgrade, we can get 2 additional points credit basically for all the solar that we're generating, all the electricity that we're generating with solar. Next.
Site plan must be a heavy load. Just a minute.
We'll give it a minute. So I'm just going to talk about it, and if it pops up, great. If not, then we've got a minute or so to kind of reload. Awesome. So in terms of systems, we do both have a geothermal heat pump system, which is a significant carbon reduction of typical mechanical systems. We have a significant on-site renewable energy production. So not only does the renewable energy is it currently projected to meet the demands, it's likely going to exceed the demands of the facility. So that will be run back to the grid. That is very exciting. In addition to this, just sort of hot topics I should have read from the top. We're both net zero energy and net zero carbon. So there's no gas essentially brought to the building and used generally. There is a generator that has gas, but there's no active gas usage on the site, which is fantastic. So it's all electric, which is where everyone is pushing. So this is it's a really great example. Next. The materials and resources category. So it's a shift to a lot more of the selection of both, the finished materials on site and also what their impacts are overall. So the building life cycle impact reduction looks at a reduction of carbon of making good choices on materials. We generally achieve this through high levels of fly ash in the concrete, a reduction of steel, things of that nature. And we're tracking 1 point right now because we have a building life cycle analysis that's being run, and we were very optimistic that we will potentially be able to bring out over an additional point or two after we run the full analysis. The building product disclosure and optimization, environmental product declarations. So all of these are new credits. If anyone that's listening in has done LEED before and they did LEED version 3, you'll see that a lot of this is not the same as the other. They've basically combined recycled content, regional materials, FSC, rapidly renewable to 1 credit for 1 point. So the big change over the past few years, I think for everything, frankly, it's our food supply and lots of things, is people want to know more about not just what's in their food, essentially, but also where it came from and the impact of the product overall. So EPDs look at the impact from cradle to grave. So either from natural extraction of the product, or if it's a recycled product from the recycling scrapyard, through end of life, and then how it's disposed of. So that's what EPDs look at. This is something that we track. You know, they fall everywhere in on the project, but a lot of times in both finishes for the project, things like that. The sourcing of raw materials is that credit that, again, if anyone was familiar with the previous version of LEED, this counts recycled content, has a regional multiplier, things of that nature. The thresholds are a lot higher for this now, so it's really tough to meet, but something we're going to track. And then building product disclosure, material and ingredients looks at just that. So it forces companies to get this third-party certification. You have to disclose down to 100 parts per million what is in your product. And so that there's full transparency. If there's carcinogens, bioaccumulative toxins, any of that bad stuff that's in there, they have to disclose it. So we get credit for having products that meet that third-party certification. And then there's construction waste management. This, 2 points for 75% used to be a slam dunk. The Mass DEP has changed the way that they look at commingled facilities. There's a thing called alternative daily cover, which is basically ground up garbage that they would put on landfills so garbage wouldn't blow away. And for the longest time, both LEED and Mass DEP saw that as recycled material, and they don't anymore. So that's the only reason why we're not tracking both of these. We're certainly pushing for that. But like with anything, once it gets harder, people have to reach and not be as comfortable with just doing, the same old. So this is a reach credit for us, and we're going to reach for it. We're really hoping to recycle as much as possible from any of the existing material that we have on site, and then be really aggressive on recycling during construction. Next. Indoor environmental quality category has a bunch of different implications. When we look at the prerequisites, there's minimum air quality performance. So that's minimum ventilation performance. And this is typically linked to code in Massachusetts. There's environmental tobacco smoke control. So there's no smoking inside the building. There's no smoking within 25 feet of building entrances and or air intakes, that kind of thing. Those are the 2 prerequisites for this category. The next credit is enhanced indoor air quality strategies. So this has been a hotter topic of conversation since COVID started than what it typically is. This looks at both, a few different factors. One is MERV filtration. So it's the level of filtering that outdoor air goes through essentially before it gets introduced to the space. And so LEED requires MERV 13. Leanne, I think we have MERV 14.
Oh, yeah, that's correct.
So we actually have a higher level than what LEED requires. And that's where at least the folks that I have been partnering with at Harvard and MIT, MERV 14 is sort of the sweet spot of both not causing, you can imagine that the bigger and more dense the filter, the more energy it takes to move air through. Right. So this is a credit category that sometimes challenges us on the energy efficiency side, because more outdoor air, more filtration, typically in our climate means more energy. But that's what we like about LEED, because it balances all these different things. Occupant health is a huge, very important goal of the project as well. So that's where the balance happens here. So we're targeting all the points for enhanced indoor air quality. We're looking at the low emitting material credits, look at flooring, ceilings, insulation, walls, composite wood. So everything essentially installed within the breathing zone that has a very high level of scrutiny on both VOCs, but overall emissions for occupant health. So that's something that we're working actively with. The construction indoor air quality plan. This is a code standard, essentially SMACNA, but LEED requires documentation of it. So it's just holding our contractors to maintaining a clean site, making sure materials on site are stored properly so that they don't get moldy or damaged, things of that nature. And that we don't, accidentally or indirectly cause any issues with having dust in ducts and things like that during construction, things that we'd have to deal with later. So it's basically good practice, and we have a LEED police on it. Indoor air quality assessment is a credit that looks at potentially flushing out the building before occupancy. It's something that we're looking at. Even if we can't meet the criteria for LEED, that's still something that we'll target, having some amount of flushing that happens. Thermal comfort and interior lighting, so sort of combining those. The first point for interior lighting and thermal comfort is about control. So it's really about giving folks and the occupants, the workers, the staff are a lot smaller of the population than the visitors. So this becomes, I would say somewhat easy on a project like this to be able to give control, but that's where those two credits factor in. And then for the interior lighting, the second point is about quality. So it's looking at different ratings, CRI ratings, reflectance values, things like that, to make sure that it's not just having access to control, but it's also having good quality light. We have great views. I don't think anyone can deny that. And we're also looking at acoustic performance. So this is a pretty high standard. I've met this credit once on one project. It's actually still an evaluation. So even the acousticians that I did work on Arab's office, and they have their own acousticians, and the standards are tough. So this is one of those cases where LEED sometimes gets ahead of their skis, but it is something that we're looking at. Next. So in addition to all those credit categories that we looked at, we also have innovation design. So we basically, all the great stuff that we're doing in the project, we may not be getting credit for necessarily in the other categories. We can claim that here. So we're pursuing low mercury lamps. So we have all LED lamps. Of course, we're hitting net zero, looking at different resilience for both the assessment and planning and the designing for the different pilot credits for LEED. We're meeting exemplary performance on energy performance, obviously, since we're net zero. And of course, we have LEED APs on staff, folks like me and other folks on the project. And then regional priority credits are essentially credits that are assigned just based on your zip code. So they've identified which of the regional priority credits, would have the most impact in the area that you're in. So we are achieving 2 of those, and we're still looking at the other 2. Next. So I think this is our final slide. So here's how we all rank up. Everything that's in the yes column here, we know that we've confirmed in design or have the intention of completing. We're at 67 points, which is actually at a very high gold level, which is great, which I think is a whole threshold greater than last time this was discussed. And then there's still maybe credits that we're looking at, but we are confidently in gold. And I will say that gold version 4, which is the standard that we're in, any projects that are gold in this version of LEED would have been platinum in the previous version of LEED. So LEED version 4 has gotten that much harder, but we're, like we're saying, the goal is to keep moving sustainability benchmarks out, and they're doing that. And I think we're meeting this pretty well. And Leon, I think that was the last slide for LEED.
It is, thank you.
Okay.
So the last section of things that we wanted to go through tonight is the construction phasing sequence. So as I think everyone is aware, the facility is an operating terminal, so we can't just close down to pursue this construction project. We have to break it down into stages to allow Steamship to continue to operate the facility. So this first slide is showing the site as it exists today or will exist basically at the completion of the waterside portion of the work, which is wrapping up this year. So the first step in the project is going to be essentially laying the groundwork for the future work. There's some in-ground utility work that we need to do for the stormwater system, and reworking of some of the other in-ground site utilities, electrical, water, some of that, to make sure that we don't have any conflicts as we move forward with the construction. We're also evaluating if this might be the stage where we do the subgrade improvement. We know we have some deep soil conditions below the proposed terminal building where we have to mitigate some peat and some other low-bearing soils that will be improved through a geopier system. We're also going to be looking for opportunities to start on the geothermal well installation. So we're evaluating the final locations for that still, and it may be that we can move that into this phase. But ultimately, this phase will be laying the groundwork for the future buildings. We also need to make some modifications to the existing temporary terminal's entry just to create a little bit of space between the future terminal building's footprint and that entry plaza, just to allow vehicles to continue to circulate between those two zones as we move forward with the project. So then once that work is complete, the next step will be to construct the terminal building itself and the plaza around it. So when that building is complete, we will then be in a position that we can decommission the temporary terminal and move that occupancy into the new building. The next step after that work is completed is then we will demolish the temporary terminal and freight shed in order to enable the construction of that new utility building. So in phase 7, that work will be the construction of the new utility building, which houses all of the staff support spaces and reworking of the employee parking lot as well. Once that building is complete, then the final step in the process will be to go back and rework the remainder of the landscape. It's at that stage where we will build the final Cahoon Park and the bicycle park, the bus islands, essentially all the landscape elements around the periphery of the site. And at that time, we'll also do final paving and some final grading as well. And so at the completion of that phase, we'll be essentially done with the project and all the work will be over. And that is the end of the presentation. So I'll hand it back over to Sean.
Hey, thank you, Leon. If you could stop your share. For the time being, anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what we can do now is take some questions. So anyone from the audience, if you could raise your hand, and then I'll just go in the order that I see them. So starting with Ann Schombacher. Unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm not sure why I'm even bothering me with this, because I know none of you is gonna do any of the things you say you're going to do. I have a couple comments. The trees that you are showing planted around the plaza at the north end of the terminal building are simply going to compound the loss of view that everything else you're doing is creating. They're going to grow up, and what little tiny specks of scenic views that might remain after your building are going to be obliterated by the trees. The chief problem I have with all of these plans is nobody has addressed the traffic question. As I look at your plan for the new terminal with the buses behind it, I cannot figure out how the buses are even going to exit onto Luscombe Avenue, because they're going to have to do what essentially is a U-turn, which you can't do with a bus that size. How are they going to get out of there? Secondly, nobody has addressed the question of the traffic coming down the Woods Hole Road and backing up onto the Crane Street Bridge, because that happens on a regular basis. at least all summer. Anybody who lives on the other side of the Crane Street Bridge is therefore blocked from getting to their homes. I live here, I pay taxes here, and the stupid tourist cars are preventing me from getting to my own home all summer. The worst traffic backup this year was something like 45 minutes that people had to sit in the ferry line before they could go home. And I don't think that's acceptable. You've got to address the fact that the Crane Street Bridge is a 2-lane bridge, and you're now occupying all of 1 lane, which means that anybody coming out of the ferry gets to use the other lane. Anybody coming off Juniper Point gets to use the other lane. Nobody trying to get onto Juniper Point has a lane. And that includes, by the way, the Coast Guard. What if there's some kind of emergency and the coasties have to come down to get on the ships because they don't live on the base anymore, and they have to wait 45 minutes in this ferry traffic line? That's unconscionable. I think you ought to be considering and discussing perhaps with the town or the state what to do to allow people who live here and pay taxes here access to their own property. I would like to comment on the previous speaker's little quip about the quality views. How nice for all the tourists and all the staff people working that they get quality views, but the rest of us who had a quality view no longer have any view whatever. So a little sensitivity would go a long way. As I said, I don't know why I'm bothering. You guys are going to do what you're going to do anyway. I hope someday you all have to answer for it, but what you are doing to this village is simply a disgrace. It's just not tolerable.
Okay. Next I'll go to Dan Kuffler.
Hi, thank you, Sean. I assumed that today's meeting was about the 40% stage that also included the building. So I'd like to make a few comments. So I'm still here to ask for a change order at the 40% stage, which should be possible. The community wants a smaller, simpler, more modest and low-key building similar to the ones you have in the other ports. The steamship is a state agency and should have greater adjustments to the community recommendations. We live here. The community's recommendations have been long-standing, and the steamship is familiar with change orders for the waterside project. So consideration of changes should really be on the table. Earlier, the steamship authority did give ground for a 1-story building, but the current footprint is still too big. And there are other reasons for making it smaller. If you look forward, the 5 ticket windows are not needed. There are new technologies existing for ticketing kiosks. You've heard this before from us, but I'd like to put it on the record again. Online ticketing programs can only get better, and I know you're working on that, but even as years go by, it will get better. The tall ceilings for the waiting rooms should not be needed because better traffic management is clearly needed, as Nan pointed out fairly clearly. And that will reduce the number of people in the terminal area at any one time, especially in the busy months. A lot has to be done to make coming and going from Woods Hole really feasible. There are other density issues that are likely to change as you look forward. Barging to and from Martha's Vineyard, and there is crucial attention needed to traffic mitigation standards that are coming into focus throughout the country, and particularly in this Northeast corridor. I really believe that a smaller footprint will work just fine, and I still think it should be possible since you're advertising this as at 40%. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank Thank you, Suzanne. We'll stay with the Cufflers and go to Damian Cuffler.
Good evening. Everything I'm going to talk about tonight is the result of the Steamship Authority not being straightforward about a major part of the landside construction that it knew right from the beginning would be a major stumbling block for getting public support for the project. It is great that the landside construction concepts meet sustainability credits. However, this is a smokescreen for the complete neglect of the Steamship Authority to make any progress in conservation and sustainability in regard to its operations, its primary operations, which is its ships and transport. And its years of continuing to push for massive increases in traffic that it encourages to come to Cape Cod and Woods Hole. I'm glad that the community has had the opportunity to give some input. However, why did it take the public input to ensure that there was appropriate attention to public safety issues? This was made absolutely clear this evening by the fact that there has been a 200% increase in space allocated for pedestrians. Why did this require public input for this to happen? Why was this not a basic assumption right from the beginning? It also appears that the greatest amount of attention of the architects has been placed on, quote, high quality materials and aesthetics. What about the major concerns of the public, such as the ticketing building and its being oversized, as Suzanne Kuffler just mentioned? Why were the covered canopies not presented to the public in its architectural design early on? Why were we prevented from understanding the implications of these ungodly high canopies, which will serve very little purpose as they are when wind sweeps the rain around them and under them? As they are built, they will block more view than was anticipated and anybody could have ever guessed. If this is the 40% design stage, as we were told this is, does this also include the 40% design stage of the ticketing building? Since the next public meeting is in December, will that also be the 40% or will it be the 90% design phase of the new ticketing building? If it is the 90% phase of the building, the public will never have the opportunity of seeing what the 40% design was, which we should have been presented this evening. And we will never know what public input was incorporated. And if so, what is the concept of the Steamship Authority asking for public input if it has no impact? We were presented for the LED analysis of the building, which appears great. However, entirely missing was, as Suzanne Kuffler mentioned, the building itself. Why is it so large? Why does it require 5 ticketing windows, such a large atrium, and such a large footprint? None of this has been justified. The only words from the Steamship Authority was, this was as small as we could make it. Nobody, as was asked at an earlier meeting, somebody did say, did you ever ask, what is the smallest we could make it? Not, this is the smallest we could make it. This is a farce. If all the landside designs are completely completed, this means that the building footprint has not changed, which was one of the major first complaints from public input. What is the meaning of public input if virtually no public input is incorporated? And the Steamship Authority gives absolutely no explanation to why outside ideas were ever incorporated. Why does it appear that only the Steamship Authority ideas and those that it asked to do its bidding are the ones that are accepted? Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. I will go to Jonathan Goldman.
Thanks, Sean. I hear Nan's frustration. I hear Damien's cogent thoughts, a lot of which I think cover some of the points that I was going to make. But chief amongst those, I have to reiterate, that is what this meeting is about the architecture, I was led to believe. So while LEED certification is a great feather in BIA's cap, and ultimately, I suppose, arguably SSA's as well, it is a smokescreen. It's a way to say publicly, look how well we are responding to issues that the public has brought in. I know because I was the one that said years ago now, where's the solar? You know, and that was in direct relation, again, to be consistent, the architectural design. I know the architectural design process. I get what this arc of story is about, but I really have to question the environmental push in an environmental community, which Woods Hole is world renowned for, where there's no discussion of the actual purpose of this site. Purpose of this site meaning the conveyance of vehicles and people and goods. Now, the people that go over emit some gases, I suppose.
Here.
Am I still being heard?
Yeah, you're still on, Jonathan.
Sorry. Because, you know, as I'm on my house float looking back at the behemoth that is the SSA now, as any one of 3 different boats leaves, billowing huge black clouds of diesel smoke. So it's all fine and well that you're planning for the site, which means that BIA in essence is doing, you know, the bidding of the SSA to try to comply with some kind of environmental responsibility. But the reality is the boats are spewing so much, and the actual physical presence of the tarmac is a negation of not what the site has always been used for, an industrial transportation hub, but it does raise the question of materials. Is there no permeable material? Is there no system to be able to make sure that any effluences that come off of transport vehicles of any type are not going directly into the water? You know, it's great you want to reuse granite, and reuse is critical to sustainability. But until Damien again reiterated the simple, or maybe it was his sister who basically said, you know, what are we doing with this gigantic building? When we've all said for years, the last time that I actually went to a ticket office was probably Grand Central, okay? And that isn't a throwback to an old system. You know, I could also always do it on my phone. And whether you're actually trying to make that a practice, to my mind, it would change the complete directions of the millions of dollars that are being spent right now, because the orientation is towards bigger and better and more impressive. You know, I said it last time. It's like the heralds in the old days of Ivanhoe calling out, "We are going to the vineyard." You know, the simplicity that is being asked for is toning it all down. And the reason for that is we can't develop like this anymore. Okay, that's partially what LEED is. LEED is to be able to say, come on, architects, you need to be able to get your Schmitz together and have some kind of responsibility to our biggest critical problem in the world, and that is the environmental stewardship. So you know, the fact that all of a sudden we're talking about light pollution, and I'm standing on Water Street and I'm looking over landfall because I have to, because there is so much light emanating from a place that there was none before. And the fact that this was not even shown to us, like Damien said, is just outrageous. And it's a done thing. It's a done deal. So the amelioration that is posited by the idea that there's a little park here that has a very tiny nod to the village's history is just that. It's an attempt at amelioration. It's not integrated into the site. I should say that I come out of a public art background, so I do know personally the process of the collaborative efforts of having an artist on staff that is part and parcel of the planning. To not have that, to my mind, is kind of saddening to me, because it says that we're just going to do it the way it's always been done, which is a landscape solution, and it's not necessary to make it integral to the site, because these people are moving anyway and they're going away. We don't want them staying there. We want them going away. So I'm just sort of disturbed by building lack of minimalization, lack of response. And like Nan said, you know, I don't even know why I bother. But, you know, until you start looking in a larger framework and becoming more open about what it is that you do, which is transport vehicles through the water with diesel power. Now, that's not going to go away tomorrow, and you're not going to have an electric ship tomorrow. Although many of the other ferry companies and ferry systems that are around the country are definitely doing that. And they are doing that in the rest of the world as well. Why this is not central to your message is beyond me. It's just beyond me. So I think that I've covered lighting, I've covered building minimalization, solar, and the whole point of energy performance has to be measured versus the actual purpose. And until there's some kind of, lack of another word, holistic approach, like a holistic approach that would have included some kind of creative input, there is not a lot of trust from our side, which I always bring up. And unfortunately, it has not changed really. In fact, I didn't even realize that there was a covered walkway with solar on top of it for the supposed bike area. Having just put 6 panels of PV on my house float, I can tell you that the system is incredible, but should have been the springboard idea at the very outset, not in retrospect, how you do this after the fact. Oh, well, maybe we should have thought about that. Are you kidding? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll go to Patty Moore.
Thank you. I am here to talk for Healthy Aging Martha's Vineyard, which is an advocacy, planning, and a community building organization. Some of you may or may not know that over a third of the island population is now over the age of 65. And that population group is continuing to grow, which I think is relevant to some of the issues that have been raised. I was startled first of all, I should say that I thought the presentation, particularly about LEEDs, was very interesting and certainly well presented. And a lot of the BIA work has been, I think, well done. However, I was startled to find myself in agreement with a number of comments that have been made, I think, from Falmouth residents, primarily around the size issue. It does seem to me that the whole overall design and planning is for the benefit of tourists, not for the benefit of residents of either community. And I do wish that more concern would have been given to the residents, and I think it will be helpful in the future, hopefully before the last 11th hour, to get feedback from more of us, and I will do whatever I can to assist in making sure that's true in future forum. So the first concern is about size, and secondly, the population I've mentioned of older adults is growing, and that means that for the next 20 to 30 years, an increasing number of the current residents will become in their 80s and 90s. And I think that is something that not only the design people, but the steamship authority itself should bear in mind. Islanders are a hardy lot. We're independent. We drive a long time, and we don't like to give up our licenses. And we're sort of ornery in our independence. So those are the people who are going to be needing to use the steamship. We have to go still off island for much of our healthcare, particularly specialists, particularly eye care. We use OCB, which has recently opened an office in Falmouth, as well as in their standard Plymouth and Sandwich areas. And people going, that means that not only for healthcare, but for other purposes, there are a lot of island walk-ons going in both directions. The long distances that it appears from looking at the designs are going to be required to walk are worrisome and may indeed be challenging. Someone has already mentioned what the need for cover, and I see the protective overhangs and that you are proposing, but it seems to me that the canopies are too big and too high to really provide much protection in a rainstorm, to say nothing of a rain and windstorm like the ones we have a great deal of. So in addition to that, I'd like the Steamship Authority, not the design folks, but the Steamship Authority to think about these questions in terms of what assistance elders are going to need in getting on and off the boat, and in finding where the bus transportation may be, or the taxis may be, because I think that's going to be a continuing and increasing issue as we go forward. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to seeing in physical terms some of your responses.
Thank you, Patty. Nan has raised her hand back up.
This is actually my husband Walt who wants to speak.
Sure, thank you.
Hi. Look, I heard I've back and forth. If Bob Morris is on, he heard a lot of this at Taft Playground the last week when we were talking about our grandchildren. But the fact is that we live on Cowdery Road, hard upon the steamship, hard upon the Coast Guard. We live between two institutions, each of which has its right to be there. And certainly, I don't argue with that. One of them, I'm going to be really blunt, okay? Mr. Davis, one of them has been extraordinarily neighborly to us. It is not the SSA. They were in their construction. You have alleged to be, but to be very blunt, everything, I think Nan said this before, I think Jonathan mentioned this and a couple others, Damien, a couple others. We've given a lot of thoughts and comments and absolutely feel that nothing has been addressed and nothing is being taken care of that we care about. There's a big problem in Falmouth caused by this traffic, obviously. A lot of it's gone through the selectmen. I understand the issue about Route 28 and the state authority over the road and why you can't do anything about it. But we live at, please forgive me, we live at the butt end of the problem here. We live right next to you guys. There are a few others who live as close as we do. Not too many. I could name them, but don't need to do it tonight. You know who they are. But, and I will give you a compliment. I heard in between taking care of my grandson and now getting here, I heard a lot, I think an hour's worth from you folks about all the wonderful things you're doing at the site. Great. I compliment you on your care for electricity, no gas, environmental issues. None of that matters if in fact you still to this day, and oh, by the way, yes, still to this day, I get people with the back ends of their cars parked illegally on Cowdery Road, spewing gasoline fumes, or if it's a truck, diesel fumes up our driveway. And I get it from the other side of the street. I have to go out there in the summertime 6 to 8 times a day on a weekend to tell people, please move. Most are very courteous. Some are not. One actually threatened me physically last summer. They all think that I'm being, well, I can't say it. They all think I'm not being reasonable. And the fact is I'm being totally reasonable. All I say to them is, excuse me, you're not allowed to park here. Well, the first words are, I'm just. Well, I'm just. That's all they ever say. And I say, well, not here. And after that, they define themselves. The minority, thank God, define themselves badly. The majority define themselves well, but I still shouldn't have to do that. I had to do it this past weekend 4 times. It's October, November, and I still had to do it 4 times. And I've been told, my first reaction is to walk over to the shed. I call it the pagoda for some reason, but I walk over there and I mention to them what's going on. They know me, which is unfortunate. I'm totally respectful. And I am totally admiring of those folks and what they go through. They go through it. And Mr. Davis, it used to be that they would listen to me, send somebody up to see what's going on, but they can't see over the hill. And finally, a couple of them, I know them by name. I'm not going to mention them, except I want you to congratulate them. They've been patient with me. They've been wonderful. But, they all say to me, well, you have to write to management. Well, we did. And then management tells us, well, you have to write to the police. Well, we did. And you have to write to the township traffic committee. Well, we did. Nothing has changed. Nothing has been addressed. I just had to ask somebody politely today to leave. In the wintertime, I guess they're maybe more polite. In the summertime, as I said, I get a lot of rude comments. Well, I'm just. You're being a jerk. And it goes beyond there. I mean, it went to a point this summer where I had to go to the shed and ask somebody to come over to help me because I was physically threatened. by somebody who just insisted he had the right to sit there, parked on Cowdery Road, out of sight of you guys. None of that's going to, and you know what, that's cars. Let's talk about the trucks. Trucks usually are respectful of that, except for the ones who idle more than 5 minutes. And that happens almost every day. But, you know, nonetheless, every now and then, you know, I'll get a truck out there. Once, about a week ago, I got a guy who claimed not to know anything about the rules. Well, if they don't know about the rules and they're driving a truck into Woods Hole and down to your terminal, that's a mistake. They should know the rules. And he claimed, and I'm sure this is incorrect, but he wanted to get out of a bad situation. He claimed that he was told by the people in the shed to wait where he was. And I know for a fact that's not true, but that's what they're reduced to. There should be something. He said to me, well, where do I go? And I looked at this guy and he could see it's a residential neighborhood. And I said, not here. Well, where am I supposed to go? I said, not my job. Go down to the shed and ask them where to go. He said, well, they're just going to tell me I have to go out of town. I said, well, then maybe that's the answer. But he wasn't accepting that. So I went and I got somebody at the shed to come up and explain it to him. And, you know, and that's what goes. And then there was the day, and I know Nat Trumbull has heard this story, but I went out one morning this summer and I saw what I called an 18-wheeler party. There was one on one side of Cowdery, downslope toward the water, one on the other side of Cowdery, right outside your employee parking lot. Either side of the street, there were two on the Crane Street Bridge, and there was one backing up down Cowdery Road right in front of our driveway. Well, I had to leave, but I couldn't. There were 3 Coast Guardsmen trying to get to work who couldn't turn left to go to the base because that truck was in the way. And he was trying to back up down Cowdery, either to hide or to back around the corner onto Little Harbor, which he did. When he came up the street, he was mad at me. And he said, look, bud, you just have to understand. And I said, you know what? No, I don't. Why are you here? And he said, well, they, the unstated they, told me to go here. I said, who told you? Well, he wasn't very clear. He was trying to allude to the fact that it was the people at the steamship who told him, or maybe it was his supervisor back wherever he came from. They were there to move your cranes for this wonderful construction project. And they had literally 6 18-wheelers sitting on that bridge, around the bridge, and down our street. And I was just sitting there amazed, stunned. And when he said to me, I just had to understand. And he said, just give me 10 minutes. And I looked at him and I said, I had to leave my driveway 10 minutes ago. And there were 3 or 4 cars headed to the Coast Guard who couldn't get there. Coast Guard couldn't come out or come in. Nobody in an emergency vehicle could have gotten out or in. We couldn't have gotten out or in until this one guy moved. And then he told me I simply had to understand. And he claimed that somebody told him, literally, this is a quote, well, try that little road just to the left of the bridge. We've heard that before. And I don't know if you've ever, I'm sorry to be so direct, but I'm the one out there, you know, not kicking, I can't do that. Politely asking people to leave. And 3/4 of them politely leave. 1/4 of them do not politely leave. And, you know, and that's it. I'm done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Walt. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I will check with Kate Wilson, see if you want to offer any closing remarks.
Hi, Sean. Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming. I think that the concerns that the community has recited, we've heard before. I agree with most of them. I do think that the building should be more in keeping with the other terminal buildings at the other ports. And I'm concerned about the amount of money we're spending on this project when we really do need to be focusing on our mission in terms of transportation, the boats, keeping them in good order, and so on and so forth. My vote is limited to 10%. So I don't have any leverage in terms of talking to the other board members. I rely on common sense, trying to maintain a dialogue, bring these issues up. It's an upward battle, I gotta say. And the footprint of the SSA is larger than just the property lines, and the impact goes well beyond just Railroad Ave and Cadbury Road. The traffic is an issue that I don't think has been adequately reviewed and considered. And we have another bus line. We have a lot of use going on in traffic wise. And I'd like the management to keep this in mind, and I hope my fellow board members will consider shrinking this project down to a smaller scale, more in keeping with the other port terminal offices. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. All right, well, we'll wrap up then for the evening. Once this video is processed, it'll be posted on our Woods Hole Terminal reconstruction page, probably not until next week, given the hour. So look for it on Tuesday. And the presentation is up there as well for anyone who wants to refer to it. And otherwise, everyone have a good evening. Thank you for coming. Chris, Leanne, everybody, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.